You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Health Hub. I'm Kathy Biasi, your host, and along with our producer, Alex Diaz, we would like to welcome you to our show this morning. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Kathy. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Full of energy today, actually. I really got a good amount of sleep last night, so I'm really pumped today. Got lots of energy.
Well, you sure have lots on your plate, so it's a good thing you've got energy to carry it all through.
Well, thanks. We'll just have to hope that I'm able to power through, but I know everything will work out.
Well, I'm sure it will. You're a very hard worker. As you can tell by our shows, are always all the mistakes are edited out, and it always goes nice and smoothly.
What mistakes? No,
what mistakes? Never. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Shh, don't say anything. No, but you always do work hard, and I always try and thank you for it. So another thank you.
You're welcome.
I do appreciate it. Today's show is being taped, so no opportunity for call-in, but please do follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on all three locations. And if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to our podcast. We are the Health Hub on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, all your favorite podcast platforms. And you can also find our podcast on the Radio Maria Canada website, which is radiomaria.ca, and on my website, which is kathybiasi.com. So I'm going to move right into our show today, and for me, the relevance of this show goes without saying. And so as not to take away from the focus of it, I'm going to go straight into telling you about our guest, Leah Penniman, and introduce you to her book, Farming While Black, Soulfire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land. Leah is a Black Kreyol farmer, author, mother, and food justice activist who's been tending the soil and organizing for an anti-racist food system for over 20 years. She currently serves as founding co-executive director of Soulfire Farm in Grafton, New York, a people of color-led project that works towards food and land justice. The work of Leah and Soulfire Farm has been recognized by the Soros Racial Justice Fellowship, Fulbright Program, Grist 50, my apologies, and James Beard Leadership Award, among others. And her book is a love song for the land and her people. And as I do with books that I love and that are extremely relevant and spirit-moving, I'm going to read to you just a few of the many, many praises for Leah's book. And again, it's called Farming While Black. Farming While Black is a rich and culturally relevant how-to manual for Black and brown farmers, filled with uplifting stories of Black contributions to the agriculture and to ongoing work at Soulfire Farm to build an anti-racist and just food system. This is the most inspiring book I have read in years, and that is by Ira Wallace, owner of Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. Another review states that equal parts of practical farm instruction and spiritual reflection on mind, body, spirit, and land. Farming While Black honors Black folks' connection to land and agriculture while recognizing structural constraints that have ruptured those connections. Farming While Black is an important text that recenters Blackness and Black people in a conversation about being growers and responsible stewards of the land. And that was by Ashanti Reese, PhD, Assistant Professor of Anthropology and co-director of the Food Studies program at Spelman College. And finally, Farming While Black is a beautiful and timely work that manages to live at once as a stunning memoir of the extraordinary life of Leah Penniman and her Soul Fire farm, a methodical and innovative instruction manual for a sustainable farm practice, and a clear-eyed manifesto that uses the rich history of the Black farming legacy as the guiding ethos for an effective modern-day resistance movement. And that's by Therese Nelson, chef and writer, founder of BlackCulinaryHistory.com. Everyone, this is a very important interview, and I really do hope that you will stay tuned with us for our interview with Leah Penniman.
I don't want to hear anymore. Teach me to listen. I don't want to see anymore. Give me a vision that you could move this heart to be set apart. I don't need to recognize the man in the mirror, and I don't want to trade your plan for something familiar. I can't waste a day. I can't stay the same. I wanna be different. I wanna be changed till all of me is gone, and all that remains is a fire so bright the whole world can see that there's something different. So come and be different in me. And I don't want to spend my life stuck in a pattern, and I don't want to gain this world but lose what matters. So I'm giving up everything because I want to be different. I wanna be changed till all of me is gone, and all that remains is a fire so bright the whole world can see that there's something different. So come and be different. Oh, I know that I am far from perfect, but through you the cross still says I'm worth it. So take this beating in my heart and come and finish what you started. When they see me, let them see you, 'cause I just wanna be different, yeah. I wanna be different. I wanna be changed till all of me is gone, and all that remains, is a fire so bright the whole world can see that there's something different. So come and be different. I just wanna be different. So could you be different in me?
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back, everybody. Our show is being recorded today, so no opportunity to call in, but please do follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on all three destinations. Welcome, Leah, to our show. It is an honor and a privilege to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's likewise an honor.
We've been back and forth trying to organize the timing of the show, and as with everything, I think that there's a purpose and a reason and a synergy, and I think now is more of an opportune time to have you on the show than it ever was. And before we get into some deeper conversation, I think what I'd like you to do is explain to everybody what Soul Fire Farm is.
Oh, thank you. I'd be happy to. So Soul Fire Farm is an Afro-Indigenous centered community farm that's located on 80 acres of mountainside land in traditionally Mohican territory. And our whole reason for being is to end racism in the food system. And in short, we're doing that in three main ways. We are growing food using the regenerative, sustainable practices of our ancestors, and then making sure that food's available to the people who need it most in our community at no cost. We are training the next generation of Black and brown farmers and subsistence growers through a whole bunch of in-person and online and home-based programs. And then we're rabble-rousing to change the really unfair policies and systems that we have in place that oppress farm workers and keep farmers off their land and make it really hard for people to get enough to eat. So we're excited to be both on the ground day to day. I just came in, I'm covered in sweat. I just came in from weeding our orchard. I'll be back out soon, but then later on I'll be in a call with some senator or congressperson talking about legislation that needs to be passed. So we got our fingers in everything a little bit.
Well, where's the passion? Where did your passion come from?
Well, everything has so many origin stories, right? But I think that my passion for the earth started really, really young. My siblings and I, we were the only brown-skinned children in our whole rural town of Massachusetts where we grew up. And to say that our peers were cruel would be an understatement. I mean, we just really struggled with a lot of racialized bullying and exclusion and stereotyping. So in the absence of a peer community, we found that the earth was our refuge, and we spent all our time in the woods. We spent all our time in the fields. So when it came time for me to get a summer job at age 16, of course I wanted to do something in nature, and I was lucky enough to score a position at the Food Project in Boston, Massachusetts, and just fell in love with that, elegant simplicity of seed to harvest. Farm for many, many years. And then what caused us to start Soulfire in particular was that my partner, Jonah, and I, and our two very young children, Nishima was 2 at the time, Emmett was a newborn. We were living in the south end of Albany, New York, which is a food apartheid neighborhood, one of those neighborhoods where it's just almost impossible to get anything fresh. And, when our neighbors found out that we knew how to farm, they started asking us to start the farm for the people. And they were half joking, but we took that really seriously and said, well, we both have farming experience. This seems like a good next step for us. And we started looking for land that would welcome us, and eventually found our home here in Grafton. That was 2006. It took us 4 years to build up the soil and the physical habitat, the infrastructure to be able to live here and farm here. So we opened Soulfire Farm in 2010 with that food justice mission.
And who tends to the farm other than yourselves? Is this like a co-op, or do you hire people? How is the whole operation run?
Well, Soulfire has gone through so many incarnations. It certainly did start out as a small family business, and it was just the family working, and then we'd have interns or apprentices or volunteers coming through. We tightened that up and formalized it around 2015 when we created both a nonprofit organization that runs the education programs and has employees. So, I'm the farm manager, and my colleague Justin Butts is the livestock manager. We have a paid apprentice and so on, as well as people, doing other aspects of the educational work of Soulfire Farm. And then additionally, we did create a co-op, but that co-op is a housing cooperative that holds title to the land. We feel really uneasy about the sort of European colonial method of dividing up and owning land by individuals. And the best thing we can do to rectify that is to put our land into land trusts or cooperatives or some of these other shared structures. So we did form a co-op, and it's a really cool legal entity, because not only does it allow all the people who live on the land, some of whom are our staff, others who choose to live here who aren't staff, they all get a vote. So it's a 1-member, 1-vote structure in terms of how we make decisions. But we also were able to look at some legal precedent from New Zealand and also from the Ojibwe Nation to put in some rights of nature clauses. So it's not just the people making decisions, right? Nature also has a vote. The forest gets to decide, if it wants to be cut down. And that sounds really weird to Western ears, even though it's very, very common in indigenous societies to consider nature as a sovereign entity. And it was, we really, our lawyers who are student lawyers that work, do this pro bono nonprofit stuff, they really struggled, but we stuck with it. We're like, you have to figure out how to make this rights of nature thing work. So that's the co-op. So there's two legal entities here.
In reading your outstanding book, and we will definitely get into that, are you a continual student in your history? Was part of the impetus, what I'm trying to get at was part of the impetus of Soulfire to connect to a past, or has this understanding evolved the more you've sort of dug deeper into farming?
Yes, we are definitely perpetual students. So, for example, when I first started farming in my late teens and into my early 20s, I was attending all of the conferences that I could get to. I was reading all the books on farming, was really, really passionate about it, and became quite disillusioned because in these spaces, the leadership, the experts were all white without exception, and most of them were men. And so I started to wonder, did I choose the wrong career? Would my, intelligence and strength be better spent doing something more relevant? So I thought to my people, like working on housing discrimination or education or whatnot. And it was very challenging. And it was actually that yearning that caused me to start to look into history, because I had a hunch that we'd only been told part of the story of what it means to be a Black agriculturalist. And the part of the story that we've been told is around slavery. And if we're lucky, maybe about sharecropping and convict leasing and the USDA's discrimination against Black farmers and these other more nuanced forms of oppression. But I thought there was probably more to it. And with that hypothesis, dug into the literature, mostly in anthropology journals. And of course, right, so many things that we think of as sustainable and organic agriculture, things like raised beds, composting, cover crops, polyculture instead of monoculture, or even economic structures like co-ops and CSAs, which stands for community supported agriculture. These come out of the Black community. They come out of African and African diasporic agricultural experts. And so that was really important for me. And of course, once I sort of found this, it's been this insatiable appetite to learn more and more. And I'm always, paying attention to what kind of literature is coming through. But I think it's been not just empowering for me, but when folks come and want to learn to farm, to understand that our connection as a people to land is not boxed in by the oppression that took place on land. While that's certainly relevant, we need to address it and heal from it, and reparations, all that is really necessary. It's also important to connect to the fact that our ancestors had a noble, dignified relationship to land that was much, much, much longer in terms of years and deeper in terms of content than the few hundred years of chattel slavery and its predecessors. So it's really been so important to reclaim that history, and a lot of the practices that we do here at Soulfire Farm come out of that research. For example, we have a jardin la cour. So my maternal ancestors are Haitian, and jardin la cour means house garden. It's a really cool intercropping of fruit trees together with medicinal herbs, and they all help each other out. Like they bring pollinators, they repel pests, they mine nutrients. It's just one of the dozens of examples of Afro-Indigenous practices that we use on the farm.
You're continually going back and you're educating us now. There's an arrogance, I guess, to farming. And I think the beauty of what you are doing is you are taking us back in a beautiful way. You're not imposing, you're educating. And there's a huge difference in my opinion, about how you are approaching things and the way you are farming. And you are inviting to all who truly want to learn.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, and we really do we cherish the opportunity to get to share this knowledge and invite people into a process of truth, reconciliation and reparations. You know, it's like there's a lot of harm and a lot of pain that exists in our agrarian history and our present. It's undeniable, right? And I also know from my own experience that this generation seems to be really ready to confront that with open hearts and minds, to have these hard, challenging, honest conversations, and to make it right, you know, not just to pay lip service, but to make it right. You know, so one example of that is a project that we helped get off the ground. Is called the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. This land trust started with just some potlucks in the wintertime, a bunch of lonely Black and brown farmers living in rural spaces wanting to break the isolation. And then realized really quickly that a commonality among so many of us was not actually holding land, because they were either employees on someone else's farm or had these short-term leases. And so we said, we really need a mechanism to have secure land tenure. And this land trust was born. And it's a really basic concept. People who have inherited property, who recognize that it's not rightfully theirs, you know, that it was first stolen from Indigenous people and then, you know, stolen again from other communities of color through exclusion and acts of violence and so on, are giving it back. So they're taking the deeds and handing it over to the land trust, where it will be permanently protected and permanently used for both environmental and cultural purposes. And there's a lot of interest, you know, like people lining up to give some land back. And so it gives me quite a bit of hope that we're in a moment where we can finally look at that hard history without a whole lot of defensiveness and avoidance, you know, and then figure out what needs to be done.
Well, how far back are these people going to realize that the land that they have was gotten by ill deeds? Are we going back like to the 1800s or as close as, you know, the 1900s? How far back?
Well, it's a good question. And, you know, I think that I don't know what it's like where you are, but certainly almost the entire northeast of the United States, which is where our land trust operates, this is unceded territory. So these are territories that were stolen from Indigenous people by ill means, like full stop, right? And even the ones that were, you know, there's sort of claims that they were gotten by legitimate means, you can dig in a little bit and see, you know, all kinds of trickery and deception and that went into the paperwork that the Europeans ended up holding, you know, the Dutch and the French and the English. So certainly there, but even more so, you know, take for example, there's a policy in the United States at the end of World War II called the GI Bill. And what it did was provide 0% interest mortgages to veterans coming home from the war. Now, the veterans coming home from the war after World War II were coming to a segregated society where there were some practices in place around housing discrimination. Most notable is called redlining. And in short, redlining is a government practice of ranking neighborhoods from most desirable to least desirable and outlining communities of color in red and instructing banks that they were not permitted to lend to them with any of these federal monies. So what that ended up with is that very few people of color were able to take advantage of these mortgages. And the GI Bill is widely credited with creating the middle class. I mean, we're talking about property and homes for people who could not afford property and homes because they have a no interest government-backed mortgage, but these went to white families. So that's an example of what we sort of term, half-jokingly, but not white affirmative action in our country. We've had a whole history of policies that have resulted in white people getting property. The Homestead Act is another one. And so even if you can't necessarily trace your particular property right back to an unceded territory or an unfair war, there's a series of policies all throughout the history of our country that have resulted in the fact that right now 98% of our rural land is white owned, which is ridiculously high and actually higher than it's ever been in this country. So 98% of the farmland is white owned. And so I think there's an understanding amongst the white community that's emerging, white people of conscience, of saying, like, it's not so much about sort of my particular circumstance, but I'm in a society where I've benefited from this amalgamation of privileges over time. And so I really need to look at what's my responsibility to share back the things that were taken with my brothers and sisters who were left out, right, of these opportunities and these programs.
As a comparative, at the height of when, I don't even know when you would call it, a more fair system was in place, the Black and brown population, how much would they have owned in farmland when you would have, at the height, I guess, I don't know how better to say it.
Yeah, so at the peak of Black farmland ownership, Black people owned 14% of the nation's farms. That was in 1910. And it's a really inspiring and heartbreaking story because, you know, at the end of the Civil War, when enslaved Africans were emancipated, there was this promise that they would get a little bit of land. You've probably heard the adage, like 40 acres and a mule. But that was a broken promise. The reparations were never given. And in fact, monies were paid by the government to the former so-called slave owners for their lost property. So it was the opposite effect. But despite that, Black people did manage to save their own money over many generations and purchase these small bits of land. And it amounted to 16 million acres, or 14% of the nation's farms. Almost all of that is gone. And there's a few reasons for that, but historians generally agree that the biggest reason is that the federal government, especially the U.S. Department of Agriculture, discriminated against these Black farmers in terms of giving out loans, insurance, crop allotments, technical assistance, and other supports that were given to white farmers over the generation. And Black people actually banded together and sued the federal government and won. In 1999, there's a very famous civil rights case called the Pigford case, which was a $2 billion settlement, the largest in the history of this country. But by that time, the farmers who were the plaintiffs in this class action suit were mostly in their 80s and 90s. They had long ago lost their farms. So it ended up being a symbolic victory, a little bit of cash for each person, but not really a game changer in terms of Black farmland ownership, more just like a reckoning with history. Right?
It's a fascinating history. What I want to do, Leah, is stop here, take a quick break, because I really want to spend the next segment talking about how you are still fighting and working to get this inherent racism out of the system. So let's take a quick break here, everybody, and we'll be back in a minute.
This morning, saw a world full of trouble now. I thought, how do we ever get so far down? And how's it ever gonna turn around? So I turned my eyes to heaven. I thought, God, why don't you do something? Well, I just couldn't bear the thought of people living in poverty, children sold into slavery. The thought disgusted me, so I shook my fist at heaven. I said, God, why don't you do something? He said, I did. Yeah. I created you. If not us, then who? If not me and you, right now. Well, it's time for us to do something. Us to do something. I'm so tired of talking about how we are God's hands and feet, but it's easier to say than to be. Live like angels of apathy. We'll tell ourselves it's alright, somebody else will do something. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of life with no desire. Says, I'm gonna do something. If not us, then who? If not me and you, salt of the earth. We are a city on a hill. We're never gonna change the world by standing still. No, we won't stand still. No, if not us, then who? If not me and you. Right now, it's time for us to do something. If not now, then when will we see an end of this pain? Well, it's not enough to do nothing. It's time for us to do something. It's time for us to do something.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, email thh@radiomaria.ca. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back, everybody. We are here talking with Leah Penniman of Soulfire, and this is an important conversation. And what I want to do, Leah, the second half is really talk about what we're dealing with currently. We've talked about history, but there is still a huge undercurrent of racism in the food chain, in society in general. We're seeing this huge movement, Black Lives Matter, pushing forward now, and it's gaining momentum. Give us a really stark picture of what we are dealing with, because I don't think the blinders are off for a lot of us.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. You know, a lot of people do ask me, they're like, what on earth does like race and food have to do with each other? Isn't food just like fruits and vegetables? And, you know, we've taken a sort of walk through history to understand some of the conditions that have resulted in the food system we have, which is very racialized. You know, it's a food system that's built on stolen land and exploited labor. And we have not fundamentally shifted the DNA of that food system, certainly in the United States, and I would argue globally. You know, if we look at labor, for example, in our nation, about 85% of the farm labor is done by people of color, mainly Mexican-born and other Latinx and Hispanic farm workers here on these temporary visas or here undocumented, whereas only about 2% of the farms are managed by people of color. That makes farm management the whitest profession in the United States, and farm labor the brownest profession in the United States. And we don't have labor laws that adequately protect these farm workers. Starting in the 1930s, when we had federal labor laws, they actually excluded farm workers and domestic workers because they were Black, and you can read the transcripts of the committees that discussed it, and that's exactly why they did it, but it hasn't been updated, right? And so we still don't have the right to bargain, the right to overtime pay, sick days, right to a day off and 7 child labor protections for farm and food workers in our country. We briefly talked about land disparities, you know, because of all of that history. You know, 98% of the land is white owned in our country, which is the highest it's ever been. And then if you go to the consumer side as well, if you are Black, Latinx, Hispanic, Indigenous, you are much more likely to go hungry. You're much more likely to suffer from diabetes, heart disease, kidney failure, and other diet-related illnesses, not because of dietary choices that people are making, but because of this really insidious system that we call food apartheid, where you know, housing discrimination and ghettoization has resulted in certain neighborhoods that don't have supermarkets, farmers markets, community gardens, public transportation, and other neighborhoods in wealthier and whiter areas that, you know, have these Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and, you know, a farmer's market on the corner and plenty of land to grow food and so forth. And so you end up with a really two worlds within the same nation where people, despite the affluence all around them societally, are really just struggling to get their basic needs met. You know, like 1 in 3 Black children experience hunger in the United States. So this is the the context. And it's not really fundamentally a different system than when you talk about police violence, mass incarceration, disparities in education, housing discrimination. White supremacy is really baked into all of these systems. And so the good news with that is we can get at root cause and we can solve a lot of problems, right, all at once. We don't have to pick around the edges. But, Soulfire is particularly focused on that intersection of racial justice and food. And there's a whole lot of things we're doing about that. On the ground, one of the things is making sure that gardens and food are available to the people who are experiencing food apartheid. And so in our area, Albany, Troy, Schenectady, it's the capital district of New York State. There are whole pockets, whole areas that experience food apartheid. They don't have those sources of fresh food. And so we're doing a doorstep delivery of fresh, healthy, culturally appropriate, diverse box full of wonderful foods at no cost right to the homes of people. So it circumvents that transportation barrier as well as the monetary barrier. And then we're also building gardens, providing the lumber and soil, the seeds, the plants for families experiencing food apartheid and supporting them in growing their own food as well if they choose to do that. So that's like one of many programs we have going on that's trying to get at this really insidious problem of racial disparity in the food system.
And do you feel that it's just one piece of an overarching issue? Are you going at Congress? You said you were going to be on the phone afterwards with legal powers and the powers that be. How are you going at Congress and legislature what are you trying to change at that level?
Yeah, it's a great question. Something I love about Soulfire is we're both like very hands in the dirt, and we also are part of this national and regional conversation about how to get at root cause. And we have taken some time over the past few years to interview hundreds of Black and brown farmers, farm workers, and their organizations to try to develop policy platforms around what are the laws that need to change. And, policy is really tangled. There's not like 3 easy steps and then it's solved. So if you're interested, you can go on our website, soulfirefarm.org, take action, and there's a list of all the policies. But I'll give you a couple examples. One of them is HR 40. This is a bill to study reparations, which I know is a scary word for some people. It really means just repair. It means fix what's been broken. And it commissions a process to begin looking at how to give back stolen land and how to give back unpaid wages and other exclusions that have happened historically, so we can address the ever-widening wealth gap in our country, which is right now around 16-1, meaning that a white child born today is 16 times wealthier in our country than a Black child, not because of merit, because you can't do a whole lot in the womb, right, but because of inheritance and all of these issues. So that's one example. Another is we're working on the Fairness for Farm Workers Act, which is a pretty modest piece of legislation. It just asks Congress to classify farm workers and food workers in the same category as all other workers to get the same protections, because right now farm and food workers are in a whole other category with lesser protection. So I was mentioning like they don't have the right to form a union or to have a day off or to be paid for their overtime. And so this would just equalize, and I would say the United States already has pretty abysmal federal labor laws, so it's should be a no-brainer. And then the last example I'll mention is a new piece of legislation that will be coming out to be named, but it specifically, it will be sponsored by Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker around creating a land trust to set aside lands for Black farmers, as well as to do some debt forgiveness around related to the historical USDA discrimination against existing Black farmers. So we've been working on that kind of behind the scenes, and that should be announced within the next month or so. And so that would be a bill that actually incorporates a lot of these different policies that we've been advocating for.
Are you seeing a shift? Are you virtually seeing a shift?
I mean, to be honest, the fact that a presidential candidate would reach out to a farm like us and ask for input on policy, that's a shift. Like, I've been in this field over 20 years, and this has not even been part of the debate, part of the conversation at all. And so I know that policy change is really slow, which is why we do things that have quicker turnaround, like our programs on the ground is at the same time. But the fact that, that these prominent legislators are even asking about these issues is a huge win for us. And I'm really excited about the future.
Are you seeing a desire for children of color to want to farm, or are you having to educate these kids to try and get their interest going, to try and bring back this industry?
Yeah. So it's been really powerful, because I was told the story that, Black folks don't want to farm. We get out of the South and away from the plantation, and that's that.
Mm.
And so I honestly assumed that we'd just be out here on our own on the land, maybe a couple field trips once in a while from some school group and be delivering food. And we were not here more than a few months when we started getting phone calls from people all across the country being like, is it true that there's like Black folks farming in a rural space? Can I come? Can I learn? And we started creating these programs. We have day-long workshops. Our most popular is a week-long immersion, both for teens, but also mainly for adults who are interested in a farming career. We have online programs. We have season-long apprenticeships, on and on, right? And I posted these programs, and they were filling up overnight. And now we have a multi-year waiting list of people who want to come out to the woods and learn how to farm. So no, we don't have to recruit people. We don't have to convince people. It's been really amazing to see that it's not about interest or passion. It's really about what resources are available to our community and opportunities to pursue this path. So now we've been running these programs almost 10 years, and we have a whole bunch of alumni who are out there running their own farms or taking other types of leadership in the food system. And we joke that it's our farmily, like family, extended family all around the country, and some including, and we have alumni also in Canada and Puerto Rico and Mexico and in the UK.
And are they carrying on the Soulfire name as they're spreading out? Is there always going to be a connection? Is Soulfire going to be Soulfire in Mexico, Soulfire in Western United States?
Well, we're definitely not trying to franchise. One thing that is pretty cool about the model that we have is we're into biomimicry, which is copying nature. So when a tree in the forest is getting a whole lot of extra sunshine, she actually doesn't grow 6 times taller than the other trees, right? She shares the extra sugars and minerals through a network of fungal mycelium so that other trees can grow and thrive, not just family, but non-family. And so we think of it in a similar way where we are providing not just education, but we're also supporting our alumni to find land, hooking them up with jobs and scholarship monies and other resources so that they can grow a locally appropriate solution to whatever the food and farming needs are in their community. For example, in Chicago, there's the Caratumbo Co-op, and this is a farm led by undocumented people who do a CSA. They're alumni of ours. 3 of them are alumni of ours. There's a farm in Atlanta, Georgia called High Hog that works on fiber. So, raising rabbits and llamas and sheep for fiber, and then training farmers in the community how to get into that. And 2 of our alumni are part of that project, both from the same family, and many other examples. And so it's not that we want a bunch of Soulfires that are, the same, but we hope that there's an essence, a spark of magic that people take from Soulfire, as well as, practical skills and knowledge, and that they are able to, create something that really makes sense for their local area.
Have you ever had people from Canada come?
We have. We've had several folks from Canada come down from the Métis community. I don't know how to pronounce that properly. Mm-hmm. A whole group of Indigenous folks joined us last year. We have 3 alumni from the Toronto area, 1 from Ottawa. So there's been a couple from Montreal also. So there's been a great group. And in fact, some of our very active alumni are from Canada. We have a speakers collective where alumni are invited to take media gigs and public speaking as part of the Soulfire Farmily and speak on behalf of our group. And there's a couple of Canadians who are very active taking up those media opportunities. So that's exciting for us.
When you look at your website, you see a rainbow of colors of people. So you're not sticking to just one group of people, right? You're educating everybody. I want to make that clear to people that are listening. Go on the website and you'll see white, brown, black, yellow, everyone, right?
Yeah, so we have programs that are designed for all different groups. For example, we have an Uprooting Racism in the Food System training. And it's had to pivot online because of COVID, though it used to be in person. And this one is geared for a multiracial community, but especially has in mind folks who are descended from Europe. So white identifying people are European Americans or Euro-Canadians. And this is a day-long course that supports people in examining their roles of both complicity as well as resistance in white supremacy, and helps them make action plans around organizational change. We have other programs that are specifically about Indigenous connection to land or Afro-Indigenous connection to land. And then we have our monthly community farm days when we're not in a pandemic, where, people come from all communities and come together. So we certainly have something for just about everyone, and we do our best to keep up with the demand and usually fail. But yes, please do check out our website and see if there's
and luckily fail, right? That's a good thing.
Yes,
I have to ask you, in 2020, how has the philosophy of Soul Fire Farms and your mission come to terms or even have been elevated against the backdrop of COVID and Black Lives Matter? I mean, these are two huge historical things that have happened in 2020. And has this served you well? Have these two events served you well in elevating your mission?
Oh my goodness, what a time to be alive, right? I mean, what a time to be alive. So I will say that if there was ever a doubt that the work of creating local resilient food systems and racially just food systems was relevant, that doubt is completely erased, right? Because I remember when pandemic hit, we'd already been overwhelmed with interest, but then seeing how many people are reaching out and saying, we absolutely need to learn how to grow our own food. Can you help us? We ended up starting all these new online programs like Ask a Sister Farmer, which is a Fridays, 4 p.m. Eastern, gardening talk show. We started, these expert forums to help farmers navigate funding during the pandemic and marketing. So if there was ever a doubt about relevancy, that was definitely erased. And then, of course, uprising on top of that, the fact that the United States and so many other nations are in a moment of reckoning and awakening around the undeniable truth that anti-Black racism is really strong still and needs to be addressed. And here we are at the intersection of these issues, right? Like food and racial justice. And so it has been a powerful time to be alive. We are certainly tired. We are busier than ever, trying to meet the needs of our community around these issues and make available whatever resources that we have. And I would say there's certainly nothing to celebrate around, the murder of George Floyd and others like him, or nothing to celebrate about the deaths of our elders and others in COVID. My only prayer is that we really learn from this time, that it doesn't become some kind of passing fad, but that it is a fundamental shift in the way we see things, where we start to embrace the power of local food systems, of mutual aid, of figuring out what public safety looks like that doesn't rely on armed police forces, figuring out what reparations and racial justice looks like. Like, I really pray that this, I'm a biologist by trade. And so when I think about evolution in terms of this dynamic equilibrium where you have stasis, and then this disruptive event and big change, I hope that we are in that moment of disruption to bring us to a new level of evolution, and that we can go from there and create a more just and healthy and sustainable world.
Wow, I admire you, Leah. You're a wonderful woman. I want to give you some space here at the end of the show to talk about your book, to talk about its relevance and why you wrote it.
Oh, thank you. Toni Morrison said, if there is a book that needs to be written that doesn't exist, go and write it. And Farming While Black is really that. I mean, I had mentioned earlier just yearning to find examples of my ancestors and my people's relationship to land that weren't just about slavery and loss. And that book didn't exist. Those stories didn't exist in one place. They were in these obscure journals and on Google Scholar. And I needed to write it. So it's really dedicated to the memory and honoring our ancestral grandmothers who had the audacious courage to braid seeds into their hair before being forced onto transatlantic slave ships. And, if they had that foresight to say, tuck away some seeds as insurance for their descendants, I think, who am I to give up on my descendants? So Farming While Black is really this seed, metaphorically and literally, the seed tucked into braid and stowed away and passed on. It's a really practical book. It teaches you how to farm. So there's that, if you're looking for that. It also has all of this historical knowledge about the role of African people and African diasporic people in terms of creating really cool agricultural ideas. And then it's got fun anecdotes about Soul Fire Farm and how we got started and all the mistakes we made. So if you just want to laugh and look at pictures, it's there too. But yeah, it's Farming While Black. It came out late in 2018 through Chelsea Green Publishing, and it's available anywhere that books are sold. There was a moment when it was actually sold out early in the pandemic, so that was pretty funny. People were rushing to get their
own
books.
copy, to figure out how to do it all on their own.
But I think they restocked the shelves, so I think you can find it.
Well, congratulations to you on so many fronts. I mean, it's just wonderful what you're doing. I admire you, and it's not going to be falling on deaf ears. We're going to continue to cheer you on and to really bring what you're doing to the forefront, because it's so important, and now is the time. So congratulations, Leah, for everything you're doing, and thank you for taking the time to be with us and share your vision, your dreams, and your movement on the Health Hub.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I wish you the best.
Thank you very much. And everyone, we'll talk to you next week on the Health Hub.
You have been listening to The Health Hub, hosted by